I've always loved bookstores. I say this as someone who recognizes an old, almost instinctive inclination. For many years, whenever I arrive in a new city, I enter the bookstores. Bookstores are full of wisdom, not just because of the books they contain, but because of the accumulation of glances, questions, and searches that have passed through them. Each shelf is like a geological layer of human thought. There are layers of time, ideas, and attempts to understand life, suffering, beauty, and mystery. And while all bookstores have some of these, it is also true that some are more special than others. This is the case with Hermeticus Bookshop. This story begins in Ashland, a small town with a particular rhythm. There is something kind in its streets, in its human scale, in the way nature always seems near. Not far from the center is this bookstore. It is discreet, almost intimate. From the outside, it already hinted that something different was happening inside. This small bookstore belongs to a close relative. It's a space cared for with love, discernment, and a clear intention to offer good books. Upon visiting it, I immediately felt the desire to paint it, not as a literal record, but as a form of conversation, a dialogue with its light and its books. I especially like this bookstore because the light is soft. It's not a dark gloom, but a gentle filtered light that invites you to lower your inner volume. There are many books on ancient spiritual traditions. One section is dedicated to medicinal plants, another to yoga, Hinduism, psychology, and Buddhism. Classical and contemporary texts coexist with old translations. Modern commentaries converse with millennial teachings. There is no rigid hierarchy, rather, there is a woven fabric. Some books invite you to dream and travel, others propose paths to cultivate well being or even deepen the practice of liberation. I decided to make two pieces, a view of the bookstore in my sketchbook and another in postcard format. I started first with a pencil sketch and then moved on to ink. First, loose lines without any intent for precision. I am more interested in capturing the atmosphere than the exact architecture. The way the shelves tilt slightly, the sense of depth, the silent spaces between the books. Drawing a bookstore is not about drawing objects. It is about trying to translate an experience. The postcards have special purpose. While painting them, I thought of them as visual letters. I'm planning to send one to my future self, a way to say, you were here, this is how it felt, this was important for you at this moment in your life. From the table where I sat to work, I also drew another view in my sketchbook. Changing the point of view changes everything. What was once background becomes the protagonist. I'm very interested in this exercise, not only in drawing, but in life. I also want to print some postcards to sell in the bookstore. I like the idea that someone else can take a fragment of this place, not as a tourist souvenir, but as a reminder of an inner experience. It's a bookstore full of rare and fascinating volumes on alchemy, hermetic traditions, and knowledge preserved by the ancient mystery schools. There are texts hard to find, editions that seem to have waited years for the right person. Entering here is like crossing the threshold of a Harry Potter library, an arcane, intriguing place where every shelf holds secrets and unresolved questions. The atmosphere is an essential part of the experience. The smell of old books, the wood floors, the silence only interrupted by the rustle of pages or Miles Davis playing softly in the background. This is something you cannot replicate with an Amazon cardboard box. Digital files are useful, yes, but the contact with paper, the weight of a hardcover book from 1930, 1970, or even the early 2000s feels different. There is a presence, an accumulated history transmitted through the hands. The selection is surprisingly wide and curated, from well-edited classics to science fiction, fantasy, contemporary novels, astrology, philosophy, and rare spiritual texts, art books, hermetic treatises, novels, chess books, children's stories. A little of everything, and a lot of what seems to have been missing elsewhere. Prices are reasonable, which invites unhurried exploration. It is also a bookstore where children feel welcome. There is a variety of books for them, stories that spark imagination, and an atmosphere that encourages lingering. A comfortable couch, tall bookshelves, books to touch, open, and live through. It is a space where browsing and sampling books is part of the ritual. More than a store, it is a collection of texts that can change your life. Used classics, rare editions, and esoteric tomes from various traditions. Unlike anything I have found in any other bookstore in the world, a hidden gem in Ashland, eclectic, magical, intimate. A place that reminds you that learning, reading, and marveling continue to be a deeply physical and alive experience. There are also art books, some very well known, others unexpected. One of them caught my attention, and I decided to explore it slowly. I turned the pages carefully, observing not only the images, but the type of gaze they proposed. Some books are not for reading, they are inhabited. As I browsed, I felt that this particular book was in direct conversation with what I was doing there. At some point, we took a break. We had coffee and played chess, something that for me requires presence. Chess forces you to pause, observe, and accept that not everything is under control. It is a silent dialogue, very similar to what happens when one paints or meditates. Chess is a practice of presence that converses with painting and reading. I returned to the table and continued drawing while people came, chatted briefly, and left. Some of these books contain stories to dream, travel, imagine, and learn. Others show possible paths to cultivate well being, to be happier, to alleviate suffering. And some go further, they point directly to the possibility of complete liberation. I began applying watercolor. The ink had already defined certain structures, but the watercolor brought breathing, the soft tones, the transparencies, the accidents. I like to let the water do part of the work. There is something profoundly meditative in letting go of control and observing how the color spreads. Being in a bookstore like this is like sharing the same space with the wisest humans who have ever existed and left their knowledge in writing, not as distant or idealized figures, but as people who also doubted, searched, erred, and still decided to write. I continued painting in my room, going back and forth to the bookstore when needed. The bookstore also has illustration books for both children and adults. Illustration has a unique capacity to convey complex ideas directly, almost without passing through conceptual language. I have worked on some projects making covers and illustrations for books, and I always learn something new. I am currently working on a very interesting project that I will talk about another time, but I can say that being in this bookstore reminded me why I do what I do, why I write, why I draw, why I read, why I keep sitting in front of a blank page over and over. This bookstore inspired me to write and draw, but also to remember something fundamental. Books are not alive by themselves. They come to life when someone opens them with sincere curiosity. I have always loved bookstores because they are places where time behaves differently, where you can enter for a few minutes and leave hours later without realizing it, where nothing is demanded but much is offered, where silence is not emptiness but presence. Ashland, Oregon was the setting for this encounter, but it could have been anywhere. The important thing was to enter, sit down, open a book, take out my materials, and look carefully. When I finished painting, I observed the pieces calmly. I liked them for several reasons, not because they were perfect, but because they captured something essential, the sense of refuge, presence, and silence. Some drawings were like photographs. These were more like memories. I was not interested in recording the bookstore as a catalog. I wanted to dialogue with it. Painting there was an exercise in intimacy and listening. My drawings do not seek photographic accuracy. They seek to be memories with their own voice. When I finished painting, I sat down to look. I liked the pieces for their ability to evoke and the honesty of the process. They are not perfect works, but they are sincere. The postcard destined for my future self was ready, a small window that says, "You were here." I was fascinated by the Buddhist books section. Here are some of the books I found and recommend you to read. 5 books to begin practicing meditation and learning about the tradition that are accessible and inspiring. The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, an accessible conversation on cultivating a more compassionate and balanced life. Introduction to the Diamond Way by Lama Olenidal, a clear and practical gateway to the Vajrayana tradition in its contemporary form. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki, a classic inviting you to hold practice with an open, fresh, and expectation-free mind. The Force of Kindness by Sharon Salzberg is a fundamental text on the practice of loving kindness, central in Buddhism. Sharon is an expert in this topic. Reincarnation by Vicky Mackenzie tells the story of Lama Yeshe and the recognition of his incarnation Lama Ozel, showing the living dimension of the Tibetan lineage. I also found 5 books to study Buddhist philosophy. These are more academic. The Dhammapada. These are essential verses attributed to the Buddha that condense fundamental ethical and contemplative teachings. Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment by Atisha is a foundational lamp-rim text organizing the gradual path to enlightenment. There are several of these meditations recorded on this channel. Uttaratantra by Maitreya, one of the most important philosophical texts of Buddha nature. Ocean of Ultimate Meaning by Thrangur Rinpoche, a deep commentary on Mahamudra. Thrangur Rinpoche was one of my teachers, a being of great realization and wisdom. Buddhist Sutras, translated from Pali by E.W. Rhys-Davids, a collection of the Buddha's teachings. Reading the sutras helps us approach his original words directly. Books I found that I would like to read. Zen and the Art of Making a Living, a title connecting spiritual practice with everyday life and work. When one happens upon a book of this kind, it is well advised to throw it away. This is a provocative phrase appearing on the interior cover that sparks immediate curiosity. Insight Meditation, The Practice of Freedom by Joseph Goldstein. I recently had the opportunity to meet him at a Mind and Life conference in Dharamsala, where he guided us an incredible meditation. Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, a book on compassion and deep acceptance of experience as it is. Women in Buddhism by Diana Paul challenges the role of women in Buddhism and highlights the existence of female Buddhas. Comfortable with Uncertainty by Pema Chodron. Clear and honest reflections on learning to inhabit uncertainty. I love all of her books. The book I took with me this time was The Wish Fulfilling Yule by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. It will help me carry out my practices. This Waitara practice requires initiation. Perhaps that is why I keep returning to bookstores, because there I find not just books, but mirrors, spaces where some part of me recognizes itself, quiets down, and sometimes transforms. And that for me is more than enough. Thanks for watching. If you like our content and want to support us, visit contemplarte.org/en.